The enemy fleet appeared from the darkness of space like a storm ready to consume everything in its path. Their ships were massive, stretching across the void in perfect formation. Cold, silent, and merciless, they had given their warning: surrender or be erased. On the bridge of the HSS Valor, Captain Rains stood tall, his hands clenched behind his back. His ship, along with the remaining human fleet, was all that stood between Earth and total destruction. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and already wounded from previous battles. But surrender was not an option. A hologram flickered to life in front of him. Admiral Cole's stern face appeared, his expression grim. "Captain Rains, this is it. The enemy is advancing. We hold the line, no matter the cost." Rains gave a firm nod. "Understood, Admiral. We won't let them through." The alarm blared across the ship. Crew members rushed to their stations. Engineers prepared the engines for combat maneuvers. Weapons officers locked onto targets. Medics readied supplies. Everyone knew what was coming. Outside the ship, the enemy fleet moved closer. Their vessels were sleek, dark, and covered in glowing red symbols. No communication, no emotion, just pure destruction. A young officer named Davis swallowed hard as he watched the tactical screen. "Sir, there are thousands of them." His voice was barely above a whisper. Rains kept his gaze firm. "Numbers don't decide battles. We do." A sudden message flashed across the screen. It was from the enemy. No image, just a simple, cold text. "Final warning. Surrender or be annihilated." The bridge fell silent for a moment. The crew exchanged nervous glances. Rains exhaled slowly, then pressed a button on his console. "This is Captain Rains of the HSS Valor. Humanity does not surrender." He sent the message. No hesitation. A heartbeat later, the enemy fired. Red beams of energy streaked through space, cutting through the blackness like spears of light. The first wave of human warships took the hits, shields flaring, hulls shaking. Explosions erupted in the distance as smaller ships were torn apart. Rains grabbed the railing as his ship trembled under impact. "Return fire," he ordered. The Valor and the rest of the fleet answered back. Blue plasma cannons roared, missiles launched, and space lit up with fire. The battle had begun. A massive enemy ship broke through the formation, heading straight for the center of the fleet. If it got past them, Earth would be exposed. "Target that warship," Rains commanded. The HSS Titan, one of the largest human warships, moved to intercept. It launched a barrage of missiles, striking the enemy vessel's shield. The shield flickered but held strong. The enemy ship retaliated with a powerful energy beam. The Titan's hull exploded in flames, splitting apart, pieces of metal scattering into the void. Davis gasped. "Titan is down." Rains' jaw tightened. Another ship lost. More lives gone. But there was no time to grieve. "Reform the line." Admiral Cole's voice came through the comms. "We cannot let them break through." The fleet adjusted, closing gaps, fighting back harder. Smaller human ships weaved between enemy vessels, firing everything they had. Pilots in fighter ships dodged and spun, launching torpedoes into weak points. The enemy was relentless, but so was humanity. A sudden explosion rocked the Valor. Sparks flew from the ceiling, and a fire broke out near the control panel. Crew members rushed to put it out. "Damage report," Rains shouted. "Shields at 50%. An officer replied. "We can't take another direct hit like that." Rains stared at the battlefield. The enemy kept advancing, pushing harder. It was clear. The humans couldn't win this fight by force alone. They needed a plan. Something unexpected, something desperate. Admiral Cole's voice came back over the comms. "Captain, we need to find their weak point. There has to be one." Rains nodded. "We'll find it. We have no other choice." As the battle raged on, the enemy fleet moved closer to Earth. The final stand had begun. The battle raged on, filling space with fire and destruction. Human warships held their ground. But the enemy kept coming. They moved in perfect formation, their sleek black ships cutting through the void like silent predators. Each attack was calculated, each strike meant to weaken the last defense of humanity. On the HSS Valor, Captain Rains gritted his teeth as another explosion rocked his ship. The bridge was dimly lit, emergency lights flickering. Smoke curled from damaged panels, and sparks rained down as crew members fought to keep the ship operational. "Shields at 30%, a young officer called out, panic creeping into his voice. "We can't hold much longer." Another crew member shouted, gripping the control panel as the ship trembled. Rains steadied himself and looked at the tactical display. The enemy was pushing harder, their massive warships cutting through human defenses like a blade through flesh. The HSS Titan was gone. Other ships were barely holding together. If something didn't change soon, they would all be destroyed. "Keep firing," Rains ordered. His voice was calm, but inside, he knew the truth. This was a fight they couldn't win with brute strength alone. Admiral Cole's voice came through the comms, urgent but steady. "Captain, we need a new strategy. We can't just sit here and get torn apart." Rains nodded, already thinking. His mind raced through possibilities. They needed an edge, something the enemy wasn't expecting. He turned to his tactical officer, Lieutenant Hayes. "What do we know about their ships? Any weaknesses?" Hayes wiped sweat from his brow, scanning the data. "Their armor is almost impenetrable, but we noticed something during the last engagement. They have centralized control systems. Their formations are too perfect, too precise. If we take out their command vessel, it might disrupt the entire fleet." Rains' eyes narrowed. "Are you saying they're controlled remotely?" Hayes hesitated, then nodded. "It's possible. They don't operate like normal fleets. There's no communication between ships, no variation in tactics. It's like they're being directed by a single mind." A chill ran through the room. The enemy wasn't just an army. It was something more. Admiral Cole spoke again. "If that's true, we need to find their command vessel and take it out. Fast." Rains turned back to the tactical display, scanning the enemy fleet. Among the massive warships, one stood out. Larger, more heavily armored, positioned at the center of their formation. If there was a command vessel, that had to be it. "There," Rains said, pointing at the screen. "That's our target." Hayes hesitated. "Sir, that ship is twice the size of ours. Its defenses are stronger than anything we faced." "We don't have a choice," Rains said. "If we don't take it out, Earth falls." A silence settled over the bridge. Every crew member knew what this meant. A direct assault on the command vessel was suicide. But if they didn't do it, the battle was already lost. Admiral Cole's voice was firm. "I'll order all remaining ships to cover you. Get in close, find a way inside, and disable that ship." Rains exhaled slowly. "Understood, Admiral." He turned to his crew. "Prepare for a direct assault. We're going in." The HSS Valor broke formation, engines roaring as it surged toward the heart of the enemy fleet. The remaining human warships followed, forming a protective barrier, drawing enemy fire away. Explosions lit up the battlefield as fighters weaved between the massive warships, dodging beams of energy and missiles. The enemy command vessel loomed ahead, an enormous black monolith covered in red glowing patterns. It barely moved, as if it had no need to evade. It was confident in its power. As the Valor approached, enemy ships adjusted, closing in like a pack of predators sensing weakness. The ship shook violently as it took another hit. "Rear shields failing," Davis shouted. "We won't last much longer." "Almost there," Rains called back. "Full speed." The Valor pushed forward, weaving through the battlefield. The enemy ships tightened their formation, trying to block the approach. But they were predictable, their movements mechanical. Rains saw the pattern and reacted. "Hard left. Now," he shouted. The ship veered sharply, narrowly avoiding a collision. The enemy wasn't expecting it. In that moment, a path opened straight to the command vessel. "We're in firing range," Hayes called out. Rains hesitated. Was this enough? Could they destroy it with weapons alone? No. The enemy's armor was too strong. They needed another way. He pressed the comms button. "Admiral, we need to get inside that ship. There's no way to destroy it from out here." Cole's voice was grim. "Understood. I'll send a strike team. But you need to hold your position. Hold position." In the middle of the enemy fleet, it was madness. But they had no choice. Rains clenched his fists. "All hands, brace for impact. We hold the line until that team gets inside." The battle was far from over, but this was their only chance. The HSS Valor trembled under the relentless assault, shields flickering as enemy fire pounded its hull. The crew gritted their teeth, gripping onto consoles, struggling to maintain stability. Sparks rained from overhead panels, filling the bridge with smoke. Warning alarms blared, red lights flashing across the room. Despite the chaos, Captain Rains stood firm. They had made it to the enemy command vessel, but now they had to survive long enough for the strike team to complete their mission. Outside, the battle was growing worse. Human warships were falling one by one, their broken remains drifting lifelessly in space. Admiral Cole's voice crackled over the comms. "Strike team has launched. They're heading toward the enemy vessel now." Rains barely had time to acknowledge the message before another impact rocked the Valor. "Shields at 20%. Lieutenant Hayes shouted over the noise. "Hull breaches on decks 4 and 6. We're losing structural integrity." "We need more time," Rains muttered. He turned to his tactical officer. "Divert all remaining power to front shields. Hold the line at all costs." The enemy ships surrounding them showed no signs of slowing. They moved with eerie precision, each maneuver designed to trap and overwhelm the human forces. But something was different now. Some enemy ships hesitated, their formations briefly faltering before realigning. It wasn't much, but it was enough to confirm their theory. If they took out the command vessel, the entire fleet would lose coordination. Rains gripped the edge of his console. How long until the strike team reaches their entry point? Hayes checked the screen. They're almost there, but enemy defenses are thick. If they don't break through soon, they won't make it. Rains' mind raced. They needed a distraction, something big enough to draw enemy attention away from the strike team. Something reckless. His eyes settled on a group of heavily armed torpedoes loaded in the Valor's missile bays. It was a desperate plan, but desperation was all they had left. "Prepare to launch a full missile spread," Rains ordered. "Target their main weapons array." Hayes' eyes widened. "Sir, that'll make us their primary target. They'll turn everything on us." "That's exactly what I want." Rains locked eyes with him. "We don't need to win. We just need to keep them looking at us." Hayes hesitated, then gave a firm nod. "Aye, Captain." The Valor's missile bays opened, releasing a massive volley of warheads toward the command vessel's main weapons. The torpedoes streaked through the void, leaving glowing trails behind them. For the first time, the enemy ship reacted. Defensive turrets emerged from its armored hull, firing bursts of plasma to intercept the missiles. Explosions erupted across its surface, sending shockwaves through space. The enemy fleet immediately shifted focus, their formations tightening as they turned their firepower toward the Valor. "They took the bait," Hayes confirmed. "Good," Rains said. "Now we just have to survive it." The first retaliatory strike came in an instant. A massive energy beam sliced through space, narrowly missing the bridge. The Valor rocked violently, flames bursting from ruptured conduits. Crew members were thrown from their stations, scrambling to regain control. "We've lost engine power," Davis shouted. "We're dead in the water." Rains wiped blood from his forehead, struggling to stay upright. The enemy wasn't holding back. They were preparing for a killing blow. The strike team had to act now. On the enemy command vessel, a small group of human soldiers moved swiftly through the darkness. clad in black combat suits. Their movements were silent, their weapons drawn. Commander Eric Voss led the team, his sharp eyes scanning the corridors ahead. The inside of the enemy ship was unlike anything they had ever seen. Smooth, metallic walls with pulsating red veins running through them, as if the ship itself was alive. "This place gives me the creeps," one soldier whispered. Voss raised a fist, signaling for silence. They were deep inside enemy territory now. One wrong move, and they would never make it out. Ahead, they spotted their target, the central control core. A massive structure pulsed with energy, cables running like twisted roots through the walls. Voss activated his comm. "We've reached the core," preparing to plant the charges. Static filled the channel for a moment before Admiral Cole's voice came through. "You need to hurry. The Valor won't last much longer." Voss gritted his teeth. He could hear the desperation in the Admiral's tone. The fleet was barely holding on. They had no time left. He turned to his team. "Set the explosives. We blow this thing, and we end the war." The soldiers moved quickly, attaching charges to key structural points. The core pulsed faster, as if sensing the threat. A deep hum filled the air, and suddenly, red warning lights flared across the chamber. The ship knew they were there. A deep mechanical voice echoed through the room. "Intruders detected." The walls shifted, panels opened, revealing enemy drones emerging from the darkness. Cold metal limbs unfolded, glowing red eyes locking onto the humans. Voss cursed under his breath. "We've been made. Hold the line." The drones attacked, firing streams of energy. The soldiers returned fire, moving between cover, trying to hold off the advancing machines. Sparks flew as bullets struck metal, and explosions rattled the chamber. Voss ducked behind a console, his heart pounding. The charges were set, but they needed time to activate them. On the Valor, Rains watched the enemy fleet closing in. The command ship was still operational. The strike team was running out of time. Davis turned from his console, desperation in his eyes. "Captain, incoming fire," braced for impact. A blinding explosion erupted across the hull. The bridge shook violently. Rains was thrown backward, hitting the floor hard. His vision blurred. His ears rang. The ship was dying around him. Somewhere in the chaos, a voice crackled through the comms. "Charges armed. We're blowing this thing now." Rains struggled to his feet, gripping the console for support. He took a shaky breath and whispered, "Do it." The final moment had arrived. The enemy drones swarmed the strike team, their glowing red eyes scanning, calculating, adapting. Commander Eric Voss ducked as a plasma bolt sizzled past his head, striking the wall behind him. Sparks erupted from the impact, casting eerie shadows across the chamber. "Hold the line," Voss shouted, his voice barely carrying over the deafening sound of gunfire and explosions. The soldiers fought with everything they had. Automatic rifles rattled, their bullets tearing through the enemy drones, but for every machine that fell, another took its place. The ship itself was reacting to their presence, as if it were alive, adjusting to counter them. One of the soldiers, Private Lee, slammed a fresh magazine into his weapon and shouted, "Commander, charges are set. We just need a few more seconds." Seconds they didn't have. The largest drone yet emerged from the darkness, sleek, towering, its body covered in pulsating red veins that glowed like molten metal. It moved with terrifying speed, dodging gunfire as it closed in. With a single swing of its massive clawed arm, it sent a soldier flying across the room. His body slammed into a control panel and went still. Voss gritted his teeth. "Fall back. Protect the detonator." Another soldier, Sergeant Kane, pulled a grenade from his belt and lobbed it toward the advancing drones. It detonated in a burst of fire and shrapnel, sending several machines crashing to the ground. But the giant drone kept coming. "Lee, trigger the countdown," Voss ordered. Lee punched the activation sequence into his wrist-mounted device. Timer set, 30 seconds. They just had to hold for half a minute. Voss turned and emptied the rest of his magazine into the giant drone, aiming for its glowing core. Sparks flew, but it kept advancing. Then, with a horrifying mechanical screech, it lunged at him. Before it could reach Voss, Sergeant Kane tackled him out of the way. The drone's claws tore through Kane's chest plate, piercing deep. He gasped, blood spraying from his mouth. Even as his body trembled, he grabbed a knife and plunged it into the drone's core. The machine convulsed, red energy crackling through its body. Then, with a final shudder, it collapsed, lifeless. Kane. Voss grabbed him as he fell. The sergeant coughed, his eyes losing focus. "Get out of here," he gasped. Voss clenched his jaw, knowing there was nothing he could do. He gave Kane a brief nod, then turned to his team. "Move. Now." The surviving soldiers sprinted toward the exit, dodging enemy fire. The ship shuddered around them as the detonation timer ticked down. 20 seconds. They reached the airlock. Voss slammed his fist against the control panel, opening the hatch. Beyond it, their escape ship hovered, its engines burning bright. They leaped across the gap, landing hard inside. "Go! Go!" Voss shouted. The pilot yanked the controls, pulling the ship away just as the countdown reached 0. A heartbeat later, the enemy command vessel erupted in a massive explosion. The core detonated, sending shockwaves through space. The ship's hull cracked apart, massive sections breaking off and spinning into the void. Fires spread through its structure, and within moments, it collapsed inward, consumed by its own destruction. The enemy fleet reacted instantly. Their movements faltered. Their perfect formations crumbled. Some ships powered down entirely, drifting lifelessly. Others fired weapons at random, as if no longer in control. On the HSS Valor, Captain Rains watched in disbelief. His ship was barely holding together. Shields gone, weapons failing, hull cracked. But they had done it. The enemy command vessel was destroyed. Cheers erupted across the bridge. Crew members, battered and bleeding, clapped each other on the back. Some collapsed from exhaustion, overwhelmed by relief. Admiral Cole's voice came through the comms. "Captain, the enemy fleet is falling apart. Their coordination is gone." Rains let out a slow breath. "Then we take the fight to them." Despite the damage, the Valor surged forward, leading the charge. The remaining human warships followed, hammering the enemy's weakened defenses. Without their command vessel, the enemy was vulnerable. One by one, their ships were destroyed or abandoned, left drifting aimlessly. On the strike team's escape ship, Voss watched the battlefield unfold. He exhaled, finally allowing himself to feel the weight of what had just happened. "Kane didn't make it," one of the soldiers said softly. Voss nodded, his jaw tightening. "He saved us all." The battle was not over yet, but for the first time, humanity had the upper hand. The battlefield was a graveyard of broken warships. Twisted metal and shattered hulls drifted through space, some still glowing from recent explosions. Fires raged in the void, their embers flickering out one by one. What was once an unstoppable enemy fleet was now a scattered, uncoordinated mess. But the battle wasn't over yet. Captain Rains stood at the shattered command console of the HSS Valor, gripping the edge tightly as the ship shook beneath him. The shields were gone. The engines were barely holding together. Every second counted. "Status report," he barked. Lieutenant Hayes wiped the sweat from his brow and checked his display. "Enemy fleet is collapsing. Some ships are retreating, but a few are still fighting. They're desperate." Rains narrowed his eyes at the massive enemy dreadnought still looming in the distance. Unlike the others, this one had not lost control. Its weapons were still firing, and it was cutting through human ships with terrifying efficiency. "That one's still operational," Hayes muttered. "Why?" Rains clenched his jaw. "Their command structure is gone. That means only one thing. That ship's captain is still giving orders. The enemy may have relied on hive mind coordination, but some of them, the highest-ranking officers, still had independent thought. And this one wasn't giving up. Admiral Cole's voice came over the comms. Rains, we need that dreadnought taken out, or they might regroup. Rains exhaled sharply. Understood, sir. He turned to Hayes. Target their primary weapons array. We take out their guns first. Sir, we don't have enough firepower left to do real damage, Hayes said grimly. Rains knew it was true. The Valor was on its last legs. One good hit would rip it apart, but they had to finish this. Then, a new voice crackled over the comms. This is Commander Voss. We're inbound to assist. Rains straightened. Voss, you're still alive. Barely, Voss said, but we've got something that might help. Through the shattered viewport, Rains saw a small but fast-moving ship weaving through the wreckage. It was the strike team's transport, and it was heading straight for the dreadnought. Voss continued, We've still got a few explosives left. If we can get inside that thing, we can blow it from the inside out. Rains knew it was risky, but at this point, risk was all they had left. Do it, he ordered. The strike team's ship darted through the debris, heading straight for the dreadnought. The enemy vessel unleashed a barrage of fire, trying to swat them down, but Voss' pilot was skilled. He dodged through the wreckage, using the floating debris as cover. On board, Voss checked his rifle. We do this fast. No mistakes. His team nodded, strapping in their weapons. They had all lost people today. They were ready to end this. The enemy dreadnought's hangar bay loomed ahead. The pilot accelerated, engines burning at full power. At the last second, they killed the thrust, allowing the ship to drift inside undetected. The moment they landed, Voss and his team burst out, weapons raised. The interior of the dreadnought was unlike the other enemy ships. It was darker, colder, the walls lined with glowing red veins of energy. The ship thrummed with an unsettling hum, like a living beast waiting to strike. They moved quickly, following their scanners to the ship's power core. They had to shut this monster down before it could tear apart what was left of humanity's fleet. Voss tapped his comm. We're inside. Moving to plant the explosives. Rain's voice came through. Make it quick. That thing just locked weapons on us. Outside, the dreadnought's massive cannons charged, glowing with lethal energy. On board, Voss and his team raced through the corridors, cutting down enemy drones as they went. The deeper they went, the more resistance they faced. The enemy knew they were there. They reached the core chamber, a vast, pulsing mass of alien machinery. The air was thick with static energy, making their skin prickle. Set the charges, Voss ordered. The team got to work, placing the explosives in key locations. Then the room shifted. The walls twisted unnaturally, and from the shadows, a new figure emerged. It wasn't a drone. It was something else. The enemy captain. Unlike the others, this one was taller, its armor sleek and refined. Its glowing red eyes locked onto them with chilling intelligence. It raised one clawed hand, and the lights in the chamber flickered. Voss aimed his rifle. You want to fight? Let's go. The enemy captain moved faster than anything Voss had ever seen. 1 second, it was standing still. The next, it was on them. The first soldier barely had time to react before the creature tore through him, sending his lifeless body flying. The others opened fire, but it dodged, twisting its body in impossible ways. Voss gritted his teeth. He had to keep it distracted long enough for the charges to be armed. He lunged forward, firing at point-blank range. The bullets struck, but the creature barely flinched. Instead, it grabbed Voss by the throat, lifting him off the ground. The world blurred. Pain shot through his body. Then, a gunshot. The enemy captain jerked back, releasing him. Sergeant Lee stood behind it, his sidearm smoking. Voss coughed, rolling away. The charges were set. They just needed to trigger them. Time's up, he muttered. He slammed the detonator. Explosions erupted around them. The core chamber shook violently, flames bursting from the walls. The enemy captain let out a piercing shriek as the flames consumed it. Voss didn't wait to see the end. "Go. Now," he shouted. His team sprinted back toward their ship as the dreadnought began tearing itself apart. The entire vessel was collapsing. They barely made it onto their transport before the hangar bay gave way. The pilot pushed the engines to full, rocketing them away from the doomed ship. From the Valor, rains washed as the dreadnought erupted in a massive fireball, the explosion spreading through its structure like a chain reaction. Then, silence. The last remaining enemy vessel was gone. A stunned quiet filled the human fleet. Then, cheers. The battle was finally over. The silence after the explosion was deafening. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the battlefield was still. No more enemy ships surged forward. No more red-eyed drones swarmed in perfect, terrifying coordination. On the bridge of the HSS Valor, Captain Rains exhaled slowly, his grip loosening on the shattered control console. The dreadnought was gone. The last enemy stronghold had been obliterated. Around him, the bridge crew sat frozen, staring at the view screens as debris from the massive vessel drifted through space. Some of the younger officers had tears in their eyes. Others simply slumped back in their seats, their bodies betraying the exhaustion they had forced aside for hours. Lieutenant Hayes wiped sweat from his forehead. We actually did it." A cheer erupted from the remaining human warships. Over the comms, voices of exhausted yet triumphant soldiers and captains filled the channel. The battle was finally over. Or so they thought. Rain's fingers tensed. Something wasn't right. The enemy had lost their coordination the moment the command vessel was destroyed, but something in his gut told him this wasn't the end. He turned to Hayes. "Scan the wreckage." Hayes hesitated, then quickly worked the controls. The screen flickered, lines of data scrolling across. His face paled. "Captain, we have a problem." Rains leaned in. "What kind of problem?" Hayes swallowed hard. "There's something still active in the debris field." The celebration across the fleet cut off as the warning alarms blared. Rains stared at the view screen, heart pounding. "Show me." The wreckage of the dreadnought was still burning, chunks of twisted metal tumbling through space. But deep inside, within the shattered remains of the ship's core, something pulsed. A faint, eerie glow. And then, movement. Rain's breath caught in his throat. A shape emerged from the wreckage. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a drone. It was something far worse. The enemy captain had survived. But it wasn't just alive. It was changing. The creature floated in the void, its body shifting, morphing, adapting. Its sleek armor, once rigid and sharp, twisted into something more fluid, more organic. The glow from within intensified, as if the very energy of the dreadnought had fused with it. It raised its head, and for the first time, the remaining human fleet saw its true form. This was not just another leader. This was their true enemy. Rain's stomach twisted. "Open a channel." Fleet-wide broadcast. A second later, his voice echoed across every remaining warship. "All ships, prepare for engagement. The fight isn't over." The silence that followed was filled only by the sound of frantic hands working controls, of officers snapping to attention despite their exhaustion. Then, without warning, the enemy moved. The space around the wreckage distorted as the creature extended its arms. A gravitational force unlike anything they had encountered before began pulling in pieces of its destroyed fleet. The wreckage shifted, drawn toward it as if it were feeding. And then, an explosion of light. The energy from the dreadnought's destruction surged into the being, crackling along its body. The thing let out a soundless roar, a vibration that rattled the hull of every human warship still in the area. "Captain," Hayes whispered, "it's absorbing the wreckage." Rains gritted his teeth. "Then we hit it with everything we have before it finishes." The Valor shuddered as it fired its main cannons. The remaining warships followed suit, launching everything they had left at the enemy. Missiles streaked through space. Lasers cut across the darkness. The creature barely flinched. Instead, it turned. And then it struck back. A wave of energy burst from its body, an invisible force that rippled outward. The nearest human ship was caught in its grasp, and in an instant, it was crushed, folded in on itself like paper. Rains felt a cold sweat on his neck. Evasive maneuvers. Get us clear. The fleet scrambled to reposition, but the enemy was faster. The being raised its arm, and another blast sent 2 more warships spinning out of control, their hulls cracking apart. Panic spread through the human forces. Then, a voice crackled through the comms. "This is Commander Voss. We're coming in." Rains barely had time to register the message before a small battered ship streaked across the battlefield, heading straight for the enemy. On board, Voss tightened his grip on the controls. The sight of the transformed enemy sent a shiver through him, but he pushed it aside. He glanced at his remaining team. "This thing is drawing power from the wreckage. If we cut off its energy source, we might have a shot." Private Lee grimaced. "And how exactly do we do that?" Voss checked his weapon. "By getting close." The ship accelerated, dodging debris as it neared the creature. It was still pulling in metal, still reforming itself. If they could strike now, they might stop it before it became unstoppable. The Valor's comm crackled. "Voss, you're insane," Rain said. Voss smirked. "That's nothing new, Captain." The enemy turned its gaze toward them. It recognized the threat. But it was too late. Voss and his team leaped from their ship, jetpacks burning as they streaked toward the creature's exposed core. It roared, trying to strike them down, but they were too fast. Lee planted an explosive. Another soldier did the same. Voss aimed his rifle directly at the pulsating center of the enemy and fired. The creature screamed. Energy crackled violently as the explosives triggered in sequence. And then, a final, blinding detonation. The shockwave tore through the remains of the battlefield, sending ships reeling. For a moment, all was white. Then, darkness, silence, and as the light faded, the battlefield was empty. The enemy was gone. The battlefield lay in eerie silence. The final explosion had been so massive that it left a temporary void where the enemy had once stood, a space now filled only with drifting debris and the dim glow of dying embers. No enemy ships remained. No twisted, horrifying creature loomed in the darkness. And yet no one dared to celebrate. Not yet. On the HSS Valor, Captain Rains gripped the edge of the control panel, his breath steady but his body tense. His eyes scanned the view screens, searching for any trace of the enemy. The sensors flickered with static, disrupted by the blast wave that had torn through the sector. "Anything?" he asked. Lieutenant Hayes shook his head. "Nothing, sir. No energy signatures, no movement." "Run another scan." Hayes hesitated. "Sir, if that thing was still out there, we'd know." "Humor me," Rains muttered. The bridge crew moved with quiet urgency, inputting commands and recalibrating the ship's instruments. The static gradually cleared, revealing a true and undeniable fact. The enemy was gone. A long silence followed. Then, slowly, realization dawned. The battle was over. For real, this time. Across the fleet, the comms channels erupted with voices, some laughing, some crying, others just letting out the breath they'd been holding for too long. The survivors of humanity's last stand, battered and exhausted, had emerged victorious. Rains allowed himself a slow exhale, his grip finally relaxing. "Patch me through to the fleet." The comms officer nodded, and a second later, Rains' voice carried through every remaining warship. "This is Captain Rains of the HSS Valor. To all surviving vessels, the enemy has been eliminated. The battle is over. Humanity has won." The silence that followed was not empty, but heavy with emotion. Then, one by one, the crews began to cheer. The voices of men and women who had fought to their last breath, who had lost friends, who had stared death in the face and refused to bow. Now they shouted, screamed, cried, celebrating the impossible. The fleet, what little remained of it, had held the line. But even as the echoes of victory filled the comms, Rain's eyes turned toward the battlefield once more. The price of survival was scattered before them. Broken ships, floating bodies, silent husks that had once been proud vessels of humanity's last stand. They had won. But at what cost? Rains turned to his crew. Begin search and rescue operations. We recover every survivor we can find. Yes, sir. As the remaining ships powered down their weapons and reconfigured their scanners for rescue missions, a new voice crackled through the comms. This is Commander Voss. Cough. Reporting in. Rain's heart nearly stopped. Voss. You're alive. More or less, Voss muttered, his voice strained but still carrying his usual defiance. Had to eject just before the blast. I'm floating out here, but my suit's intact. Wouldn't mind a pickup, though. Rains allowed himself a rare grin. We've got you, Voss. Sit tight. The bridge crew cheered again, this time for one of their own. The fleet, bloodied but not broken, began its slow retreat from the battlefield. Searchlights flickered across the wreckage, pulling in survivors. The wounded were brought aboard the remaining ships, the dead honored in hushed, respectful whispers. As Rain stood at the viewport, watching the endless field of stars beyond the wreckage, he felt something strange, a feeling he hadn't dared entertain since the war began. Hope. Humanity had been on the brink of extinction. They had been outnumbered, outgunned, and pushed to their very limits. And yet, they had survived. The enemy had underestimated them. They had believed humans were weak, fragile things, incapable of standing against a superior force. But they had been wrong. Humanity was not weak. They were relentless. They were unbreakable. And even in the face of absolute destruction, they had refused to fall. As the fleet prepared to return home, what was left of home? One thought lingered in Rain's mind. This was not the end. There would be other battles, other wars, other threats lurking in the shadows of the galaxy. But humanity had proven one thing today. No matter what came next, they would always hold the line.